Richard Hayes looked perfect on paper. At just 42, he was a billionaire, CEO of one of the most powerful tech empires in Silicon Valley. People said he had the Midas touch. Everything he touched turned to gold. Investors worshipped him. Magazines chased him. News outlets called him the visionary of the future. He had 5 luxury cars lined up like trophies in his marble driveway. Each one sparkled like a diamond under California's sun. He had a private jet, a chef who prepared meals he barely tasted, a mansion with 27 rooms, and not a single one felt like home. His house was built mostly of glass, high on a hill, so he could see the world below. But no one could see him. And maybe that's how he preferred it. Or maybe it was what he feared the most. His mornings were always the same. A silent wake-up to an empty bed, a robotic greeting from the AI system. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." No warmth, no soul, just code. He'd sit at the edge of his king-size bed, staring at the floor for minutes, sometimes longer. He didn't know why. His breakfast was served by silent staff. Nobody asked how he slept. Nobody cared. And he didn't either. The mirror in the hallway always showed the same thing. Perfect suit, polished shoes, dead eyes. He got in his black Bentley and drove to the office, pretending to be on top of the world. But deep down, he felt like a prisoner of everything he'd built. At work, everyone smiled when he passed. But the moment he left the room, they relaxed. He could feel the fake energy, the careful laughter, the forced respect. His assistant once said, "You're intimidating, sir." But it wasn't power he wanted. It was connection. No one dared joke with him. No one asked him how his weekend was, because they knew he didn't have one. His life was work, emails, meetings, endless numbers on a screen. At night, he returned to that cold, echoing mansion. The lights turned on automatically. He didn't even have to lift a finger. He would walk past his pool untouched, past the home theater, never used, past the gym, still smelling of new paint. He'd sit at the giant dining table, alone. One plate, one glass, surrounded by 15 empty chairs. Sometimes he played music to fill the silence, but even Beethoven couldn't touch his heart anymore. He was numb. He once had love. Years ago, her name was Melissa. She left when his ambition became obsession. "I miss you, not your money," she had whispered before walking out the door. He let her go, chose empire over emotion. Now he wondered, was it worth it? His nights were the worst. He would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking, overthinking, trying to remember the last time he laughed. Really laughed. He had everything, except peace, except meaning, except someone to call just because. Every now and then, he'd scroll through his contacts looking for a name, a friend, anyone. But the list was full of bankers, lawyers, analysts, people who called him sir, people who wanted something. No one wanted him. One night he found an old photo on his phone. It was from college, when he had messy hair and a crooked smile. He was laughing, arm in arm with a group of diverse classmates, so full of life, so alive. He stared at it for hours. "What happened to you?" he whispered to the screen. Tears filled his eyes but didn't fall. Even his tears had grown tired of him. The next morning he looked out of his glass wall at the world below. He saw the cars, the people, the lights, but it all looked so far away, so meaningless. "What's the point of all this?" he said aloud, voice cracking. The AI replied, "I'm sorry, I don't understand the question." And that's when he knew. The smartest machine in the world couldn't answer what his heart needed most, because the answer wasn't in code. It wasn't in money. It wasn't in things. It was somewhere out there. And for the first time in years, Richard felt something stir in his chest. A whisper, a tiny ache, the beginning of a change. He just didn't know yet that life was about to throw him into a story no billionaire could ever predict. The sky was angry that night. Thunder cracked like a whip across the dark clouds. Rain poured in thick, icy sheets, blurring the road. Wind howled through the trees like a warning. Most people were home, safe, dry, warm, but not Richard Hayes. He was driving back from a soulless dinner with investors, the kind where everyone smiled too much and meant none of it. His suit was pressed, his shoes were Italian leather, but inside he felt hollow, as always. He could have taken the highway, but something inside nudged him to take the back roads. He didn't know why. Maybe he was trying to escape something. Maybe he wanted to feel human. As he turned onto the old bridge road, the rain turned brutal. His car, a sleek, black Tesla, suddenly jerked. The dashboard lights blinked. Then, nothing. The car died. Seriously? He muttered, gripping the wheel. He tried restarting it, tried calling for help. No signal. Not a single bar. He was alone, and for the first time in years, powerless. He got out, coat pulled tight, and stood in the rain. It soaked through his clothes in seconds. Lightning lit up the bridge ahead like a flash of truth, and that's when he saw them. Three small figures, huddled under a ripped, soggy cardboard sheet near the bridge pillar. Their clothes were thin, their shoes barely held together. But they were laughing. Real laughter. The kind Richard hadn't heard in years. Not from adults, not from anyone, and certainly not from kids who had nothing. He squinted. One was black, maybe 12 years old, with wide eyes and a cracked smile. One was Latino, smaller, maybe 10, with wild, curly hair. The last, a white boy with freckles and a missing front tooth, around 11. They looked like brothers, but not by blood. They passed a dented bag of chips between them, like it was a feast. Their laughter echoed across the rain. And then, the black boy noticed him. "Hey, mister, you okay?" he shouted, waving. His voice was full of energy. No fear, no hesitation. Richard didn't know what to say. He looked down at himself, drenched, miserable, confused. He didn't feel like a CEO anymore. He felt small. My car broke down," he said awkwardly. "You want to come sit with us?" the white boy called out. "Least you'll stay dry," he chuckled, pointing to the sad cardboard sheet. Richard blinked. They're offering me shelter? Something cracked in him. Not just surprise, shame. How could boys with nothing be so generous? He hesitated, then slowly walked over, his designer shoes sinking into the mud. As he approached, they scooted to make space. It was tight. It was cold. It was wet. But somehow, it felt warmer than his mansion ever did. "I'm Jamal," the black boy said. "This here's Carlos." He nodded to the Latino kid. "And that's Tommy," he added, elbowing the freckled boy who grinned. "I'm Richard," he said, unsure why he felt nervous. Carlos offered him the chip bag. "Want some?" "They're kind of stale, but still crunchy." Richard smiled faintly and took one. It was stale, but it tasted more real than the $500 steak he'd eaten earlier. "So what are you doing out here, mister?" Tommy asked, pulling his hoodie tighter. "My car broke down," Richard repeated, but the words felt empty. What was he really doing here? "Rich guy like you? Shouldn't you be in a fancy place with heaters and golden toilets or something?" Jamal teased. The boys laughed again. Richard chuckled too. It surprised him. That sound hadn't escaped his lips in so long. It startled him. "I guess I was just driving around," he admitted, "trying to clear my head." Carlos tilted his head. "You sad or something?" The question hit like a punch. No one ever asked him that. "Yeah," Richard whispered. "I think I am." Silence fell for a moment, but not the awkward kind, the honest kind. "We get that," Tommy said softly. "Sometimes the world just feels heavy." "Yeah," Jamal added, his voice more serious now. "But when we got each other, it's not so bad." Richard looked at them, three boys from different worlds, abandoned by society, left in the rain. Yet they had something he didn't. They had each other. They had heart. And in that moment, under a soggy piece of cardboard, in a freezing storm, Richard Hayes felt something he hadn't in years: connection. As the rain poured and thunder rolled, the four of them sat together. Rich, poor, young, old. No titles, no barriers. Just humans. Just souls. Just a spark of warmth in a very cold world. He didn't know it yet, but this stormy night would be the beginning of something that would change everything. The rain had softened to a drizzle, But Richard's mind was still storming. The four of them sat close under the makeshift shelter. The boys huddled in threadbare jackets, their breath visible in the cold air. Richard, still in his drenched, tailored suit, felt strangely out of place, and yet exactly where he needed to be. He looked at them, not with pity, but curiosity. Who were they? Why were they out here all alone? Where were their parents? "Do your families know where you are?" he asked carefully. Jamal was the first to answer. "I don't got a family no more," he said, eyes fixed on the wet ground. "I used to live with my mom in Oakland. She was funny. She'd dance in the kitchen, even when we had no food." He smiled for a second, then swallowed hard. "But the drugs took her slow like poison. One night I came home and she was just gone." His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. He looked up at Richard, eyes older than 12 should ever be. "I waited 3 days before I left. She never came back, so I did." Richard's breath caught in his throat. The silence that followed was not empty. It was sacred. Carlos gently bumped Jamal's shoulder. "We've all got story," he said. He pulled his knees to his chest. "I used to live in Fresno. My dad, he wasn't really a dad. He was a monster in a man's body." He looked away, jaw tight. "Every night he'd drink, and every night I prayed he'd forget I existed." He took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. "The last time, he didn't stop. I woke up with a busted lip and blood on my shirt. So I left, just walked out the front door and never turned back." Richard's hands trembled slightly. He thought about the headlines he'd seen, the numbers he'd ignored. Runaway children, broken homes, statistical charts and corporate reports. But sitting here, these weren't numbers. They were boys, living, breathing truth. Then Tommy spoke up, quieter than the rest. "My story's kind of weird, I guess," he said, staring at his muddy sneakers. "My mom died when I was little. My stepdad raised me. He was strict, always yelling, always telling me what not to be." He paused, chewing his lip. "When I started hanging out with Jamal at the shelter, he got mad, told me I was a disgrace, said we don't mix with their kind." Richard's stomach turned. "I told him Jamal was my best friend," Tommy continued, voice shaking. "He punched a hole in the wall. Next morning my bag was on the porch. Door locked, that was it." Silence returned. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't sad. It was real. The kind of silence that holds pain in its arms and rocks it gently. Richard didn't know what to say. He'd been in thousands of meetings, made million-dollar speeches, but nothing he'd rehearsed in boardrooms could prepare him for this. 3 boys, 3 broken homes, 3 aching hearts. And yet, they smiled. They still smiled. "We're brothers," Jamal said, looking at Richard now. "Not by blood, but by soul." Carlos nodded. "We got each other's backs. That's all we need." Tommy leaned in. "We don't need people to feel sorry for us. Just someone to see us." Richard's eyes burned, not from rain, from truth. He had spent years chasing power, building walls around his heart. But these boys, with their scars and dirt and torn jackets, they had more strength, more heart, more courage than any board member in his company. He swallowed hard, voice low. "I see you." 3 words, but they mattered. They weren't just noise, they were a promise. And in that moment, something inside Richard cracked open. Something buried. Something human. He looked at each of them. Jamal, Carlos, Tommy. Names he would never forget. Stories that would live in him forever. The wind whispered through the trees like a sigh. And for the first time in years, Richard's heart felt heavy. Not from emptiness, but from meaning. He didn't know what came next. He didn't have a plan. But he knew one thing. He would never walk away from these boys. Not now. Not ever. The storm passed, but something inside Richard Hayes stayed stirred. The night he met the boys didn't leave him. It lived in his chest like a candle that refused to die. It flickered in his dreams. It hummed through his empty mansion. It echoed in his every silence. He went to work the next morning, but numbers felt meaningless. He sat through meetings, but every face felt hollow. PowerPoint slides blurred. Charts meant nothing. All he could think about was them. That night he didn't go home. Instead, he filled the back of his Tesla with groceries, warm clothes, flashlights, and water bottles. And he drove back to the bridge. When he arrived, they were still there, curled beneath their damp shelter, playing a card game drawn on scraps of paper. Tommy saw him first. "Hey, it's Mr. Fancy Pants," he yelled, grinning. "Thought you forgot about us," Jamal teased. Carlos waved, eyes wide, when he saw the bags in Richard's hands. "Whoa, is that pizza?" "Three kinds," Richard said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't know what you liked." They didn't ask why he came back. They didn't ask what he wanted. They just made space for him, like he belonged. And for the first time in years, he felt like he did. Night after night, he came back. Always after dark, always without his driver, always alone. He brought them thick socks, beanies, sleeping bags, books, even a tiny camping stove. Some nights they told stories. Some nights they played made-up games. One night they read The Giver out loud together, trading pages between laughs and yawns. Richard laughed, real and unfiltered, the kind that made his chest ache and eyes water. Carlos called it old man laughter. Tommy started calling him Richie. At first it stung, then he loved it. No one had given him a nickname since college. No one had seen him as anything but a suit, a CEO, a dollar sign. But the boys didn't care about that. They cared about him. They taught him how to listen, not with his ears, but his heart. They taught him to slow down, to notice the stars, to share even when you had little. They taught him how to care, how to give with no expectation, and how to receive even when it made you feel vulnerable. It wasn't long before Richard started missing them during the day. He'd catch himself smiling during calls, thinking about Jamal's jokes or Tommy's wild storytelling. He began carrying around a wrinkled drawing Carlos had made of the four of them. It was taped inside his briefcase. He didn't tell anyone. Not his assistant, not his board, not his shareholders. This was his. Private, sacred, real. But as the nights grew colder, so did his worry. What if something happened to them? What if they got sick? What if someone saw them and called the authorities? He couldn't shake the thought. One evening, as Jamal coughed into his sleeve and Carlos shivered so hard he spilled hot chocolate, Richard made a quiet decision. The next day he bought a small, old apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a working heater, and clean sheets. He didn't ask permission. He just showed up one night with keys. "What's this?" Jamal asked, looking at the manila envelope. "A place to crash," Richard said, trying to sound cool. "No big deal. Just something I do sometimes. Charity stuff." The boys looked at each other. Carlos narrowed his eyes. "You serious?" Richard shrugged. "It's nothing fancy, but it's warm, and it's yours, for as long as you want it." Tommy walked up and gave him a hug so fast Richard froze. It had been years since anyone had hugged him like that. "You're the real deal, Richie," Tommy whispered. Richard smiled, blinking fast. That night he helped them move in. He watched them run their fingers over the light switches like magic. He saw them giggle when they found toothpaste and fresh towels. He watched Carlos fall asleep on the couch mid-bite of a sandwich. His heart swelled and broke all at once. He told himself it was just charity, that he was doing the right thing, but deep down he knew the truth. He didn't want to lose them, not because they needed him, but because he needed them. It started with a camera flash. One moment Richard was carrying a grocery bag into the apartment, fresh eggs, milk, and Jamal's favorite cereal. The next he was blinded by lights and voices. Mr. Hayes, is it true? Why are you hiding homeless kids in a city apartment? Do your shareholders know what you're doing?" He froze, blinking under the harsh glare. Dozens of reporters crowded the sidewalk, microphones shoved in his face, cameras snapping like angry bees. The boys peeked out the window upstairs. Tommy ducked. Jamal yanked the curtain shut. Carlos backed away in fear. Richard stood there, exposed, defenseless. The world he'd kept secret had just been cracked wide open. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Millionaire CEO living double life with street kids. Tech giant's founder goes rogue. Why is he hiding runaways? Charity or crisis? Richard Hayes, Sparks investor. Panic. It was vicious, speculative, cruel. They didn't ask why he did it. They didn't tell the truth about the boys. They just wanted scandal. By noon, his board of directors called an emergency meeting. "Richard," said one executive, steepling his fingers, "we're getting calls nonstop. What you've done? It's concerning." Another added, "We don't question your intentions, but the optics are disastrous. Investors are pulling out. Stocks are falling. We've already lost two major sponsors." He sat in silence, watching them squirm, not because of what he'd done, but because it didn't fit their world. A world of perfection, of performance, of profit. "Your mental health has come up in conversations," said the CFO awkwardly. "Some believe this behavior shows instability." Richard stared at them, the people who cheered him when profits were up, who praised his vision, his drive, his empire. Now they looked at him like a liability. He stood slowly. "You want me to apologize?" And he said. They didn't answer, but their eyes said yes. "You want me to distance myself, cut ties with the boys, pretend this never happened?" Silence again. "It's not good for business," one whispered. That's when Richard felt it, rising in his chest. Something hotter than anger, stronger than fear, conviction. He walked out of the room without another word. He didn't go back to his corner office. He didn't check his stocks. He went to the press room. Every major news network was there, still buzzing from the morning's chaos. They didn't expect him to speak, but he did. He walked onto the stage, alone. No notes, no script, just truth. "I'm Richard Hayes," he began. "Yes, I'm the CEO of Hayes Tech. Yes, I've been spending time with 3 homeless boys. Yes, I gave them shelter. Yes, I love them." Gasps, cameras flashing, reporters leaning forward. "I met Jamal, Carlos, and Tommy on a rainy night when my car broke down. They were soaked, shivering, and hungry. But they offered me kindness. They didn't ask for anything. They just cared." He paused, his voice trembling now. "They taught me more about love, loyalty, and humanity than any boardroom ever did." Flashes lit up his face. The crowd was stunned. "These boys aren't criminals. They're not throwaways. They're not trash. They're treasure." He pointed toward the cameras. "If you think race or background or money makes someone less worthy of love, if you think poverty means you deserve nothing, if you think giving a child dignity is a scandal, then you don't belong in my company." Stunned silence. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "This is my resignation." A gasp swept the room. "I'm stepping down as CEO because I refuse to lead a company that's afraid of compassion. I refuse to sell my soul for comfort." He left the stage to a sea of silence. But as he walked out the back door, the boys were waiting. Tommy looked worried. "Did they fire you?" "No," Richard said softly. "I fired them." Jamal grinned. "You serious?" Richard smiled, tears in his eyes. "For the first time in my life, I'm free." Carlos hugged him tight. "You stood up for us." He looked at them, all 3, his chosen sons. "No," he whispered. "You stood up for me. I just finally learned how to do the same." And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the headlines, not the company, not the loss. Because what he gained was family. The media firestorm eventually faded. Other scandals rose. New CEOs replaced Richard in headlines. But something far more powerful had already begun. It started with a single spark. The story of one man and 3 homeless boys. But sparks can ignite wildfires. People watched Richard's speech over and over. Clips went viral on social media. Tears streamed down faces as strangers whispered, "Maybe he's right." The name Soul Brothers came from Jamal, of course. He scribbled it in a notebook one night, saying, "We're not just brothers by life. We're brothers by soul." Richard smiled and said, "That's the name." Within weeks, he poured his personal savings, millions, into building something new. Not a company, not a brand, a home. Soul Brothers was more than just a shelter. It was a sanctuary, a haven where abandoned kids of all races, colors, and scars could come and just be. No judgments, no numbers, no forms asking for proof. Just beds, meals, music, therapy, books, and arms that didn't strike, but embraced. Word spread. Celebrities donated anonymously. Teachers volunteered to tutor. Doctors offered free checkups. A retired musician gave free piano lessons in the old dining room. The mansion that once echoed with loneliness now burst with life. Its marble floors became racetracks for sock-footed kids. The glass walls held posters and crayon art. The fountain out front overflowed with giggles on summer afternoons. Jamal, Carlos, and Tommy were no longer kids on the street. They were his sons. Adoption papers were signed on a rainy spring afternoon, the same kind of rain that had brought them together. Only this time, there was a rainbow on the other side. Carlos sobbed into Richard's shirt after the judge smiled and said, "Congratulations, Dad." Tommy tried to act cool but kept wiping his eyes. Jamal whispered, "Told you we were family." Richard looked at the paper in his hand. Not a stock report, not a quarterly update, but a birth of something new. He had lost a company, but found his soul. Over the next year, something incredible happened. Families came from across the country. Some were white, adopting black kids. Some Latino couples adopted Asian children. Some were single moms, some same-sex couples, some older folks just wanting to give love. Racism didn't vanish. Hate didn't disappear overnight, but it shook because of one man who chose love over image, because of three boys who chose each other over survival. The news now called him the father of soul brothers. Documentaries were made, books were written, but Richard didn't care about fame. He cared about tucking kids in at night. He cared about Saturday pancake mornings. He cared about watching Jamal tutor the younger ones. Carlos building things out of Legos with kids who couldn't yet speak. Tommy hosting movie nights with subtitles so no one felt left out. He cared about a world that felt possible. One evening, Richard stood in his once empty living room, now full of chaos and love. A toddler clung to his leg. Laughter rang down the halls, the smell of cinnamon filled the air. He looked at his boys, his sons, sitting on the couch, surrounded by a dozen others. Kids who once slept in cars, in alleys, on sidewalks, now wrapped in blankets, in stories, in belonging. Richard whispered to himself, This is the point. Not profits, not praise. People. Love is the only legacy worth leaving. And in the soft golden light of that evening, Richard Hayes, the once lonely millionaire, wasn't lonely anymore. He was home. Moral of the story: race is not a boundary. Kindness is not weakness. And no child is too broken to be loved. A richer world begins when we see one another, not as threats or numbers, but as soul brothers and sisters in this human family.